Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, the state of Minnesota finally opens their first adult use dispensaries, and President Trump's drug czar admits that cannabis reform is a bipartisan issue and that rescheduling is still being considered. And Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer threatens to double cannabis taxes on the industry in her state, which could threaten its existence. Amie Carter has that story. Guess who is criticizing Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive order on THC hemp regulations? Yep, it's that Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, as the power struggle heats up in the Lone Star State. And this is the weekend of the annual Freedom Rally in Massachusetts, where the legalization of cannabis is now celebrated.
Chris Faraone here, 36th Annual Boston Freedom Rally. Big deal here. Mount Michael Malta in the background over there, main stage back there, tens of thousands of people, Parkman bandstand right there.
Across the pond, Snoop Dogg's venture capital fund invests heavily in the British cannabis market as Snoop continues to carve out his place as the #1 cannabis influencer in this country. All that and international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Karen Black, filling in for Elena Pinto, who is off this week, but is expected back next week. Our first story this week is an update on cannabis reform at the federal level. It's been over a month since President Donald Trump mentioned at a news conference that rescheduling, or as he stated, reclassification, is something he wants to take care of over the next few weeks. In the meantime, the president's nominee for the next drug czar, Sara Carter Bailey, testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee this past week and shared that rescheduling is a bipartisan issue and talks are continuing behind closed doors. Nothing ever moves fast in Washington, D.C., and Andrew Behringer has more from our nation's capital.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. President Donald Trump's nominee for White House drug czars, Sara Carter, has highlighted that cannabis is a bipartisan issue, but emphasized that the administration is still considering all options on how to approach cannabis scheduling. During her recent confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Carter discussed the potential to move cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III of the Controlled Substances Act. She stated that all options remain on the table, while also recognizing widespread bipartisan support for cannabis reform, especially around medical cannabis benefits. Now, Senator Cory Booker, a strong advocate, pressed Carter on advice she would give to the president regarding the rescheduling process. Booker praised the medical benefits of cannabis, particularly for treating PTSD, and called for more scientific research. Carter responded that she supports a bipartisan approach and pledged to follow federal law and emphasize her focus on research and data. She mentioned her meetings with the VA secretary and her belief in studying cannabis impacts thoroughly. While Carter says she has no problem with monitored legalization, she also detailed the current legal restrictions that prevent the drug czar from endorsing legalization efforts. A Democratic bill is still currently going through Congress to remove restrictions around cannabis. Carter will continue the trend of recent officials supporting medical cannabis, but the debate over rescheduling and broader legalization remains ongoing. Now, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the stories that seems to be going on forever is the battle over hemp regulations in the state of Texas. There are two different political leaders on the debate. One is their governor, Greg Abbott, and the other is his lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, who also controls the Republican-led Senate in that state. Governor Abbott wanted specific regulations, and Patrick wanted an outright ban on all THC-infused products derived from hemp. That is now a $6 billion industry in Texas with over 50,000 citizens employed. So Governor Abbott called two special sessions of his legislature over the summer to come up with a regulatory plan. Those two sessions did not solve anything, so Abbott used his executive order powers to enact regulations for the industry that at least keeps the industry alive. Kerry Hinkle has more in his hemp report this week.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the second week of September, we see a final resolution in the long saga that has been the Texas legislature. As you may remember, in the last few months, both during regular session and the subsequent two special sessions, the legislature, the governor, and in particular the lieutenant governor have been unable to find a compromise on all things hemp regulation. That is why this week, Governor Abbott issued an executive order that requires the Department of State Health Services, DSHS, to work with TABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, to implement some much needed regulation on the industry. This includes 21 and up by only selling these products to adults, truth in labeling, and elimination of lookalike products, and also a study to subsequently be had at A&M to look at how to implement larger regulations during the next session, and industry feedback will be welcomed alongside law enforcement and others in this commission at A&M. So the governor is taking short-term action on some products as well as establishing a commission to look at how to properly regulate these for the long term during the next session. Now, the part that's most interesting in the hemp industry right now is a new requirement for total THC testing standards. We've seen other states like Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Kentucky implement total THC testing standards with an effort and a direct attack on hemp flower. So while we still wait for DSHS and TABC to implement rulemaking and take industry feedback and understand exactly what the governor can and can't do with his executive order, by issuing a total THC testing standard, many in the industry view this as a direct attack on hemp flower availability. So we will see how that category is specifically handled here soon, but the larger industry of beverage, edibles, topicals, tinctures, etc. is now safe thanks in part to Governor Abbott and his executive order. This is a clear attempt to implement regulation rather than prohibition of a large $6 to $7 billion industry that many adults in Texas currently enjoy. So thank you for all that have been following along in the last few months of this long saga. We are thankful here at Bayou City Hemp for Governor Abbott and his action with the executive order. But for, again, I am Kerry Hinkle with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Next week, I will be back with another state and hopefully nothing Texas related for some time.
One disturbing trend in state politics that continues in the U.S. is now moving into Michigan. That trend is an increase in taxes on cannabis when any state needs to make up for a budget shortfall. Michigan has grown into one of the most successful cannabis states, but now the governor there wants a hefty tax increase. In our Michigan report this week, Amie Carter has some background on this tactic and how the industry is responding. The Michigan Report is now sponsored by Wally's Wonder World of Customized Humidors.
This is mold on wheat. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonderworld plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the handmade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom-made, handmade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Boy, do we have a lot going on. Time to light it up. The Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency is playing catch-up, but they're finally trying to tackle the black market and unregulated hemp products. The CRA's director, Brian Hanna, has seen some legal products that are way too potent, and he's not having it. Their game plan, they want to create a new $2.8 million lab to get their testing dialed in, and also trying to clean up the licensing process. Basically, the CRA is trying to get a handle on the industry again and keep the market safe. A 19-year-old from Clarkson is in big trouble after allegedly selling cannabis and vapes to a 12-year-old outside of a school. Police say they found a huge stash of cash, weed, and vapes in his grandparents' basement. He's now facing felony charges, and a judge will decide his fate soon. Michigan's cannabis market is swimming in supply. Monthly sales hit a record of $283 million in August, but prices are at an all-time low. There's way too much product. For every pound sold, 2 more are produced. It's a buyer's market, but a tricky one for businesses. 4 cannabis companies in Oakland County got busted for breaking the rules. Moses Roses got a slap on the wrist for a paperwork mix-up. Aries Analytic and Steadfast failed their lab tests, and Society C got caught with a messy waste system and some gear that they did not register. Talk about a sketchy delivery. Battle Creek Dispensary is in hot water after regulators say they sold pounds of cannabis to an out-of-state buyer. The case broke open when cops found a huge stash, 7 pounds of flour and 16 ounces of concentrate in a car near Warren Dunes. Video footage allegedly shows a customer leaving the Fire Creek dispensary with a duffel bag full of 200 packages of product. Michigan's Best Buds got their awards. The 4th annual Olympics competition, aka the Grammys of Michigan weed, just crowned High Tech, Archive, and Growing Pains as the top winners. The sold-out event lets everyday weed lovers judge hundreds of strains before a big party in Pontiac where champions are announced. And I cannot stress enough, please call your lawmakers this week or join us for Advocacy Day in Lansing on Wednesday, September 24th. Democrats in the state Senate are reportedly backing Governor Whitmer's plan to almost double the tax on cannabis. They want a new 32% wholesale excise tax to raise nearly $500 million for road repairs. But the industry is worried it will crush businesses and make a legal product way too expensive for consumers. That's it for this week. Again, please reach out to your lawmaker or scan this code easily and send an email. I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
Federal and state cannabis laws, rules, and regulations relating to all cannabis products continue to confuse citizens and lawmakers in this country. The state of Texas is a prime example of this, where they have an over-regulated and barely surviving medical program and a thriving hemp-derived THC products industry. Some states have flat out banned all hemp-derived THC products, and now you can add Maryland to that list. A court decision this week in the Old Line state defined the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9 products for sale in that legal adult use market. Keep in mind, the federal government defined legal hemp with the passing of the 2018 Farm Bill, and that launched 2 different billion-dollar industries, one that is unregulated and the other that's overregulated. Christopher Bright has more in our Maryland report this week.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. A Maryland affiliate court has ruled that Delta 8 and Delta 10 THC products are illegal and have always been illegal in the state, despite lax enforcement. The decision reported by the Baltimore Sun clarifies that these hemp-derived cannabinoids, often synthesized from industrial hemp, don't fall under Maryland's legal adult use cannabis program, which allows Delta 9 THC from cannabis. The court rejected a lawsuit from Maryland's Hemp Coalition, which argued that the state regulations created an unfair monopoly punishing unlicensed hemp businesses. Judge Dan Friedman stated that the Cannabis Reform Act protects public interest and that hemp-derived intoxicants aren't covered by federal hemp laws. Meanwhile, Maryland's legal cannabis industry generated $18.4 million in tax revenue from April to June 2025. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Nicole Butler, aka Canna Cape Cod DC on IG. Her Instagram showcases a vibrant Black woman-owned 420-friendly resort on the East Coast. It highlights all-inclusive stays with infused meals, edibles, a flower bar, an open bar, and a 24-hour snack bar. Make sure to follow her on IG at Canna Cape Cod DC. That's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Virginia this week, the Patients Out of Time Advocacy Group held their annual convention. This is one group in the States that has always recognized the medicinal benefits of the cannabis sativa plant. Joe Parsons was there, and here's his report for this week.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Today, I'm proud to be in Charlottesville at the Patients at a Time 16th Annual National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics. It's been an absolutely awesome day. Today was the final day of the show. I was able to catch up with a bunch of the people that were involved, including, of course, none other than Mary Lynn Mathis.
This is for you guys, because if we don't give it to you, the government's going to take it. If that makes sense. So we might as well give it to the people who've been fighting the hardest to get the cannabis plant as a medicine. We believe this is the right path because we play within the guidelines of the FDA, of NIH, of the international treaties. And if we're trusted with a little bit of this, maybe, I'm very optimistic, they'll trust us with some of the other compounds as well, to where we can start building a plant-based medicine system for the United States, for the people, and get them off of this synthetic compounds. One
increment, we have Bridget Caldwell goes on our area directors, Patients at a Time, and she's coming today talking about prison cannabis and traditional medicine. We also need to see what is our focus and alterate so that we can have illicit impact. And that we're not leaving any patient back. If our patients are already using cannabis, isn't it our responsibility to guide them? Not leave them to the street.
All right, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville. And reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One of the most recognized advocates and outspoken leaders in the cannabis reform effort in this country is Wanda James in Colorado. Now, she's announced that she is making a run for one of the congressional seats in the Centennial State. Here's Jenny Germano with more from Colorado.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A major Democratic primary is shaping up in Colorado. As business leader and cannabis pioneer, Ms. Wanda James has officially announced her bid to unseat Representative Diana DeGette. Ms. DeGette has represented Denver's 1st Congressional District since 1997. Ms. James is a first-generation University of Colorado graduate, Navy veteran, and entrepreneur, and has built her profile over years in both business and in politics. She and her husband founded Simply Pure, widely recognized as the first Black-owned licensed cannabis dispensary in the United States. Her campaign announcement came on September 17th, 2025, when she launched her 2026 primary challenge to Ms. DeGette, saying the Democratic brand in her district needs renewal. She argues that longtime incumbents are no longer reflecting the evolving demographics, needs, and expectations of Denver voters. Ms. James tells voters her priorities will include expanding affordable health care, supporting small businesses, and tackling rising costs of living and improving quality education. Ms. James has political experience behind her. She helped Governor Jared Polis with his first congressional campaign, served on the task force for Colorado's legalization of adult use cannabis for Amendment 64, and has been active in fundraising and democratic politics at state and national levels. Her supporters say she brings both lived experience and real organizational strength. Stay tuned for future updates leading up to the 2026 primary in Denver, Colorado. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the A block or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And we still have our international segment for you. Plus, the Massachusetts Freedom Rally took place this weekend in Boston. Curtis Emery will have our Bay State report coming up as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the B block or second section of our Cannabis Coast to Coast News show. Did you know that the second largest medical cannabis market in Europe is in Great Britain? It is, and it's second only to Germany. Now, Curaleaf, one of the largest multi-state operators in the U.S., is banking on the development of the medical market in the UK. According to Prohibition Partners, the number of medical patients in Great Britain represents less than 10% of the total number of patients who could benefit from plant medicine. In order to educate the medical community here, Curaleaf has formed a partnership with the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society and with Curaleaf Labs. The purpose and goal to make sure that those patients who can benefit from the plant for its medicinal benefits can get their doctors on board to prescribe it. With more from the UK, here's Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with the UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. £13.3 billion in 10 years? That's the amount of money that could be unlocked across the British economy if NHS access to medical cannabis was expanded. According to a report commissioned by Curaleaf, thousands of people with long-term health conditions across the UK could return to the workplace, and hospital admissions could be reduced by up to 28% if more doctors working for the NHS were able to issue CBPM prescriptions. Currently, medical cannabis is only available in the UK via the NHS for a few severe conditions, meaning the majority of CBPM patients pay hundreds of pounds per month to private clinics and pharmacies. A change in the law and in the way that medical cannabis is prescribed and accessed would improve lives, relieve pressure on the NHS, and support the government's 5-year plan to get more people working. That's all for this week's UK Report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There are two news notes from two of the smallest states in the United States, Delaware and Rhode Island. Delaware just opened its adult use market and now is already allowing more counties in that state to offer licenses, while Rhode Island is finally issuing their first adult use licenses. 3 years after the Ocean State introduced legal adult use regulations, the Rhode Island Cannabis Control Commission announced this week they will be offering 24 adult use dispensary licenses through the end of this year. This weekend in Boston was the 36th Annual Freedom Rally. The Talking Joints memo writer and publisher Chris Faraone was on hand and files this report.
All right, Chris Faraone here, 36th Annual Boston Freedom Rally. Big deal here. Mount Michael Malta in the background over there, main stage back there, tens of thousands of people, Parkman bandstand right there. Randy Blaze just went on. We had a big tribute to Bill Downing, legendary activist, one of the founders of the Freedom Rally. Props to Masscan for really pulling this off again. You know, the Freedom Rally has a legendary history of terrible weather. I think the second one was rained out. It's been rained out years past. They've lost a ton of money. Not this year. Perfect weather 2 days in a row. It's also not always 2 days, so just an absolute glorious event. And, you know, tribute to activists. There's education, there's plenty of weed, and there's a lot of freedom. I was just looking at this recently. Years ago, I think so, as far back as like 20 years ago, they'd arrest about 150, 160 people a year here. That went on your permanent record. Of course, those records are now expunged. But I can't stress enough, there's a reason that this happens here on Boston Common. And that reason is that the activism's not done, right? The second Freedom Rally 35 years ago was held right on the State House steps. And of course, the Golden Dome is still in the background. And still till this day, Masscan, which of course is, you know, our advocacy group in Massachusetts. The reason we have cannabis here today, they are advocating for a number of bills on Beacon Hill still regarding everything from medical cannabis to potency limits. So it's important. The fight's not over, so it's a big party, no doubt, but also paying tribute to activists and, you know, letting people know about, you know, what still has to be done. So props to Masscan on number 36, and I'll see you again next year. Never miss one.
Now let's take a look at what else is going on in the Bay State. Here's Curtis Emery.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A conclusion to the 2-year-long legal battle of Shannon O'Brien and Deborah Goldberg and O'Brien's return to the CCC. Yes, the state had cleared Chairwoman Shannon O'Brien to return to the CCC after her leave of absence started in 2023. However, Deborah Goldberg seemed to want to block her return and filed an appeal to keep O'Brien from returning. However, as of September 18th, Goldberg announced she will no longer be pursuing that appeal, giving O'Brien the green light to return to the CCC without any more interference from the treasurer. Also in mass news, the state celebrates $1.3 billion in sales this year alone, with the highest grossing month so far being August, with a total combined sale of $157 million. That includes both recreational or adult use sales and medical sales. It seems like cannabis is off to the races here in Mass, with only more money to be made and more people being serviced and served by our great dispensaries here in the state. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Next up is the Arizona Cannabis Report with Karen Black. This week she looks at the Health Department's Fungal Awareness Week as well as the Medical Marijuana Testing Council's meeting. Here's Karen.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's health regulators are putting renewed focus on fungal contamination risks. The Department of Health Services is observing Fungal Disease Awareness Week, and this comes as the Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council met September 15th to address transparency concerns about lab enforcement records and fungal testing protocols. The timing is significant. Arizona saw multiple cannabis product recalls for Aspergillus contamination this year, Council members pushed for improved public access to testing facility violations, with the Department of Health Services confirming that deficiency reports are available on AZ CareCheck. Not too long ago, Arizona State University research found 16% of seized cannabis samples contained dangerous mycotoxins, underscoring why mandatory aspergillus testing for inhalable products remains critical for immunocompromised medical cannabis patients. Meanwhile, Arizona's hemp sector finally has some good news after months of negative headlines about intoxicating hemp product bans. The Hemp Industry Trade Association of Arizona hosted a successful fiber harvest demonstration Monday in Yuma, featuring Arizona's leading hemp fiber grower, Dan Noel. The event showcased sustainable agriculture benefits, like that hemp uses 75% less water than alfalfa and cools soil by 20 degrees. The association also launched their Adopt an Acre of Hemp initiative, signaling renewed investment in industrial hemp despite regulatory challenges with hemp-based THC products. On the education front, Life is Chill announced Arizona's first Cannabis Wellness Expo targeting seniors 55 and older. The free December 9th event at Phoenix Shrine Auditorium addresses growing demand for cannabis education among mature consumers and will feature workshops on product labels, dispensary navigation, and therapeutic applications, complete with transportation from independent living communities. And finally, Sunday Goods opened its fourth Arizona location in Surprise. They're running a grand opening promotion through October 3rd, and they're featuring a custom golf cart giveaway. The move demonstrates continued retail expansion despite industry-wide market pressures here in the Grand Canyon State. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Oklahoma continues to suffer from the handling of an overexpansion of medical licenses when that state first started their medical-only program. Now that state has another problem with an influx of illegal operators from China. Oklahoma awarded 14,000 licenses for the sale of medical cannabis when they first opened in 2021. That number is now down to about 5,000 operators, as reported by Politico. That same report claims that growers were able to produce 64 times the amount of cannabis that was sold and consumed. With more from Oklahoma, here's Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma law enforcement told Congress last week that the state's cannabis industry has been overrun by foreign nationals, mostly from China. They say these groups have infiltrated the market that launched in 2019, peaked with nearly 14,000 licensed businesses in 2021, and has now dropped to about 5,000. Of those, around 2,000 are cultivators. Law enforcement claims to have shut down 6,000 of these operations. And while the market itself clearly played a role, officials argue the outside influence has had a major impact. And with Oklahoma law enforcement on this Reefer Madness mission, it's even more important to get those signatures for State Question 837 to put adult use cannabis on the ballot in 2026. And now, on a lighter note, a new product is making its debut in our state, and the name alone will grab your attention. It's called Nudes. The creator, who is known as Favy, alongside his beautiful wife Ashley, says it's not just a name, it's a vibe. Favy has actually been rolling joints with noodles for years. That quirky tradition inspired their signature hand-rolled hash holes, aka glory holes. And beyond the fun name, there's a real innovation here. The noodle crutches, what many call tips or filters, are biodegradable and not as harsh as cardboard. So if you're chasing white ash, oil rings, smooth pulls, and unforgettable flavor, Nudes might just be your new go-to smoke. I'm super excited to try these because I actually roll my joints using rotini noodles at home. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. I'm Kimmie Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
When it comes to the tribal lands movement in the cannabis industry, Only one reporter continues to consistently keep us updated on what's going on, and that's Tina Tasaka, who reports from Nevada every week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The UNLV Cannabis Policy Institute is doing more than rolling the dice. At a recent showcase on September 5th, Congresswoman Dina Titus, co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, gave a special address to kick off the event alongside other notable speakers and delegates. This student showcase allowed for students to give 5-minute presentations. Undergrad and grad students delivered research, writing, and policy analysis related to cannabis, such as law, health, psychology, regulation, policy, and more. Key highlights from the students include these studies: medical innovation, creating synthetic CBD alternatives to study treatments like epilepsy, despite federal limits. Illicit market risks. Nevada loses $370 million in untaxed sales with rising youth use and dangerous synthetics. Public health and equity. 2.5% of U.S. adults show cannabis use disorder with disparities across communities. Events like this help bring more visibility to lesser-known risks and encourage public health interventions. Public awareness is key. It's been 5 months since the Sequan tribe and Mr. Alex Ayan opened San Diego's county's first legal cannabis consumption lounge, Sessions by the Bay. With tribal cannabis expanding, I wanted to circle back to this location for a fall spotlight. Sessions by the Bay is making waves culturally, socially, and economically. This 16,000 square foot, 3-story destination blends premium cannabis, infused cuisine, and immersive art to create a vibrant, welcoming space for all. Thanks to California's Assembly Bill 1775, visitors can legally enjoy cannabis on site, elevating the state's cannabis lifestyle, already generating millions in local tax revenue to support community programs and infrastructure. Sessions by the Bay is more than a lounge. It's a cultural hub and a major economic driver with exciting plans for the future, including a rooftop bar. Imagine those views and sunsets. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Ann, the Chicago Clone Guy, and this is Bird reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I have some very interesting news to report today about my hometown in Bensenville, Illinois, which is attached to O'Hare. There was a company there called Midwest Goods, LLC, that was raided by Pam Bondi, by RFK Jr., by the DEA, by the U.S. Marshals, and more. They were raided specifically because they've been buying vapes from China for many, many years. So, long story short, they're cracking down on illegal vapes from out of the country, specifically China. They have THC in them, tons of other chemicals. They're non-regulated. They raided and took over 600,000 vapes from Midwest Goods, Inc. out of Bensenville, Illinois, my hometown. Then after that, Pam Bondi and RFK Jr. both did big speeches about the raid and how they're cracking down on illegal vapes from China. No arrests were made. They just took all their product, and they still been doing it, but that's what happened in my hometown. That was interesting. In other news, Governor Pritzker, pretty much kind of out of nowhere, just threatened possible executive order in regards to increasing the requirements to purchase and sell hemp in the state. So Pritzker is saying that if the legislature doesn't come up with a plan to regulate the sale of hemp more efficiently and more safely, he's going to come in and do an executive order to change that. He cites that his main concern for this executive order is the children. Pritzker's only worried about the children. So if we can't figure it out, then he's going to have to come in and tell us what to do. I agree with that statement, but the problem is Pritzker is part owner and friends with owners of commercial marijuana dispensaries who pretty much want to take over hemp sales, so you can't just sell hemp anywhere, but only in the dispensaries. So at the same time, there needs to be more regulation for hemp to protect children, but at the same time, it's got to be for the right reasons. But anyways, that sums it up for the Chicagoland, Illinois area news. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy. This is Bird reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This was the first week of adult use sales in the state of Minnesota, which is fast becoming a vibrant market. Our correspondent Alysha Bellamy is one of the lucky ones who has a micro license, and she has an update on what's going on in the land of 10,000 lakes.
I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report. This week I want to talk a little bit about the educational rollout in the Minnesota cannabis space. We have the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild, we have Sumaine Roots, and the Minnesota Cannabis College, which I've talked about several times. I do sit on the board of that organization. These are non-accredited cannabis classes and courses that you can take here in Minnesota. Let's talk a little bit about the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild, where they are very big into craft cannabis. The way we handle terpenes, terpene tasting, and also just the plant from seed to consumption, and how it should be more of a ritual than just a eighth or just a joint. We also have Sumaine Roots. Sumaine Roots is a majority deaf-owned company that has goals of teaching hearing impaired people how to get into the cannabis industry. And then we have the Minnesota Cannabis College, which I am so happy to be a part of. Like I said in a prior report, we got a $250,000 grant to teach. We will be teaching about cultivation, a 13-week course, and retail for a bud tender, which will be a 5-week course. We're so excited to get started. This is your Minnesota report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Ohio sales have surpassed the $3 billion mark, and recreational sales have increased 224% since December 2024. And with the continued excitement of pre-rolls now being available in Ohio, we have 3 new dispensaries around town, in Girard, Middleton, and Proctorville. So welcome to Ohio, and let's see these continued growth in sales. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally, did you happen to see Snoop Dogg this week? I mean, the rapper and hip-hop legend is everywhere. He's a judge on The Voice this season, and you know he'll be at the Olympics again with NBC. He is also a shrewd businessman and is now an investor in the emerging medical cannabis market in the UK. His venture investment fund is called Casa Verde Capital, and his group put in 4.5 million pounds, or just over $5 million to the medical cannabis company Ma Medica. It's good to be Snoop Dogg, and he is quickly becoming the biggest cannabis celebrity in the world. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For Karen Black, Dave Barton, and Tina Tasaka, I'm Kimmie Cannabis. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Elena Pinto.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Elena Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com